The webinar is now being recorded and it's starting, and it is January 24th at 12 noon.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Rochelle Chong, and I am your moderator today. We wanted to welcome you to the Scenic Broadband Roundtables. It is the first of a series of educational panels about advances in technologies impacting broadband. As you may know, California right now has a very ambitious and increasingly urgent state goal to bring broadband to 98% of our residents. In addition, for the first time in my lifetime, there is a very large sum of appropriations dollars in the billions of dollars in the federal level and more at the state level to help make this broadband goal a reality. So it's an extremely exciting time and an important time for the future connectivity of California. But the stakes are high. To ensure we meet our goal, we need to be very savvy about how we spend these dollars to bridge the digital divide. There's access divide, meaning infrastructure. There's also the digital literacy and digital adoption and digital equity pieces of the puzzle. We have to keep our eye on making sure we serve those who are low income and disadvantaged. The success of our efforts in this decade are going to be in the hands of smart decision makers, policymakers, regulators, and internet service providers who serve our state, and also in the hands of our communities who are going to get this service. To this end, the intent of these scenic broadband sessions are to educate, to enlighten, and to inform through discussion by experts. Technology neutral approaches are very important given we have many geographic challenges in our state. One key to success is a fiber middle mile backbone that will bring connections to the internet into these areas that lack internet connections. This middle mile backbone will enable the broadband to get to our unserved and unserved populations. And these are households, these are businesses, and these are community anchor institutes such as schools, libraries, healthcare, clinics, and emergency responders. We have a very important statewide middle mile project working on the middle mile aspect right now, led by the California Department of Technology, in consultation with many agencies, including the PUC, Caltrans, and more. Scenic has been chosen as the third-party administrator of the middle mile network. But once we have the internet backbone in place, then what? The goal is, of course, to bring broadband speeds to those areas. And in a perfect world, we would put fiber to each location. But this is an expensive and difficult proposition in a state so vast as California, with varying geographic terrain. And so in areas that are remote, rural, a wireless solution is often what needs to be used. It's cost effective, it's swift to deploy. It doesn't require trenching with environmental impacts. Already we have a history of fixed wireless network projects being used with very great success in our state. So today we have an amazing panel that has been gathered by Scenic to discuss advances in wireless broadband strategies and to dispel many myths about wireless technology. This is the first in this series of broadband roundtables. The next broadband roundtable will be held in early February, and it is going to address the topic of advances in cable technologies. The third Scenic Broadband Roundtable will cover technology advances for fiber to the home and fiber to the premises networks. So you'll see we have a lot to learn. Today, though, I'm honored to introduce our panelists. The first one is Philip Deneef, who is the GeoLink's Chief Strategy Officer. Could you wave, Phil? Thank you. He's going to talk from the perspective of a California-based internet service provider who uses a mix of fiber and fixed wireless to serve residential and commercial customers particularly rural schools, libraries, and they've also had an important role helping stand up some wildlife monitoring systems for the state. Next, we have Matthew Rantanen, who is the Director of Technology for the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, SCTCA, and Director for the Tribal Digital Village Network. Matt is, without question, our California go-to expert on tribal digital efforts, and he's going to talk about the challenges of tribal networks and discuss some success stories. Next, we have Professor Ramesh Rao. He is a professor at UC San Diego and also the director of the Qualcomm Institute. Professor Rao is going to take us into the future. He is going to enlighten us on where wireless technology is headed. He's going to talk about some actions that were taken by the Federal Communications Commission that paved the way to where we are today, and to think about the wireless future of broadband provision. Last, but certainly not least, we have Nishal Mohan, who is the founder and president of Mo Human. I love that, Mo Human. And he is an entrepreneur in residence at UC San Diego. He is going to give us some perspectives on wireless technologies for the unconnected and the disadvantaged. He has a view on why community wireless systems may be necessary and appropriate for digital equity. So the way we're going to run this is we are a three-part program. We're going to have some brief presentations by each of our panelists, starting with Phil, then Matt, Ramesh, and Nishal. And I'm going to ask that while they're speaking, if you do have any questions for them, please put it into the Q&A part of the chat. Not the chat, but the Q&A part. You'll see at the bottom a little Q&A. You can put your questions there. And I have some help from Leanne from CNIC, who's going to monitor the Q&A and make sure that we answer them. She has waved, thank you. And then the second part of the program is we are going to have a moderated Q&A by yours truly. And then at the end, at least 15 minutes, we're going to have a Q&A from the audience. So we'll pick up any questions in the chat that we had not answered and any new questions. So everybody remember to use your Q&A chat function to ask your questions. And so I'm now going to ask Phil to take it away from GeoLinks. Make sure you unmute yourself, Phil. There you go.
There we go. Hey guys, thank you for having me. I will be sharing my screen here. Do a brief presentation to go over some things about GeoLinks and fixed wireless in general. All right. Is everyone seeing my screen? There we go. So first question, who don't know about us, we were founded in 2011 here and are still headquartered in Southern California with offices in our main headquarters and 8 different facilities across the state. We currently provide thousands of connections to residential, consumer, and anchor institutions across the state of California. We like to think our coverage area runs about from the Mexican border up to the Oregon border, and it reaches some very hard to reach places as well as some very dense urban and suburban locations as well. Our partnership with CNIC, which started back in 2016, has resulted in over 100 different projects connecting some very hard to reach anchor institutions throughout the entire state. With that, we also did a partnership with Alert Wildfire, providing those fire detection camera services, co-location, and backhaul services to over 150 different systems throughout throughout California. We recently completed an acquisition of LMDS spectrum, which makes us the largest holder of that spectrum, the 2931 gigahertz throughout the United States. In California, in the Los Angeles BTA, we pulled 450 megahertz of that. And we'll get into a little bit about how we can leverage that spectrum to deliver gigabit, multi-gigabit last mile connections in some very hard to reach places as well. Through the Connect America Fund 2 auction, we were the 5th largest in the nation and the largest in California, total $1 million. And for the RDOF auction, we were the third largest in California, 12th in the United States, just over 200 in total provisional award there. And looking forward to leveraging that with the synergies of our existing network to provide connectivity to a lot of underserved locations as well. Talking about some of the advantages of fixed wireless. When I talk about these advantages, I am by no means putting down fiber in any way. We build hybrid networks all the time, and we use the best technology that's available to solve problems. When we look at fixed wireless, objectively, when we approach a project, we do know a couple of things for sure. We have the ability to extend connectivity over long distances without the need for trenching. So that allows us to take fiber where it is today, whether that's at a building top or a tower location, and look to extend that over multiple miles, 10s, 20s, 30s miles, by adding hops in there to the gigabit connectivity. By doing that, all of our analysis that we've run is extremely cost effective when compared to fiber to the premise, fiber to the home scenarios, because the cost per meg per mile just drops dramatically. Speed to deployment is another huge advantage in fixed wireless when we're looking at how do we get some early wins and how do we continue to build on that momentum. Network extension, so that means we've got some existing assets, fiber connection, something, we can start working on those and build those out in weeks and not months. When we look at greenfield deployments where there is either no power, no connectivity, and we've got to build a brand new network, we can do that in a matter of months and not years when we look at compared to fiber. And that is looking at some suburban areas. As you get into rural and very sparse areas, the timeline to build fiber extends even further. We do have the ability to reach locations without compromising quality, speed, or latency. And that's a huge one. This is not a way to reach these people in these communities and bring them connectivity that's not going to be value or future proofed. What we've done over and over again is bring something that is going to be like a fiber-like quality and has the headroom. So if they're purchasing 100 megs or 500 megs today, they can scale to that gig and multi-gigabit connectivity based on what we're doing. Very impact and the option, we've got roughly 200 sites that are running on 100% solar. And this allows us to leverage the topology of California and get in and around some of the valleys and put up relay facilities where there's not traditional power. Fixed wireless has proved to be extremely resilient in natural disasters as we look at wildfires and earthquakes and things like that in the state. We've proven that this technology can be more resilient. There was a couple of instances where fiber cables and terrestrial infrastructure would be damaged in a fire, and it would take days, weeks to restore that service. And fixed wireless, we've had areas where there's been fire where there's been no damage, and when there was, we're able to stand that connectivity back up within 24 hours. And then the last point is it does currently meet and exceed all federal and state bandwidth requirements. When it's engineered correctly, we can far exceed all that and look at, like I said, multi-gigabit mile. So when we look at some of the things we talked about as being extremely cost effective, wanted to look at some of the price comparisons that we did. This is a elementary school that we worked with Scenic. We ran the fiber estimates to run the 19 miles from the district office. That total came in over 24 million. We were able to construct that network for $339,000. And that has sort of rang true, not exactly that percentage, but we're talking pennies on the dollars when we're looking at some of these rural locations and getting fiber from an A to a Z location or even out to the internet. When we talk about the rapid deployment, this is Captain Cooper Elementary out in Big Sur. For all my people in Big Sur, I hope everyone is safe right now. I know the fire is raging. We've got our teams standing by with cameras. We've got some infrastructure supporting the anchor institutions, and hopefully everyone is evacuated and safe. But what we were able to do for them was take them from a 10 meg connection to a 100 meg connection. And it took our team only 4 weeks to complete that network infrastructure. And that network is capable of increasing up to a gigabit when that school. We continue to invest in that community. We're providing connectivity to multiple entities, including the hospital, the library system, working with the Nature Reserve and California State Parks to continue to bring connectivity into that area. we look at an instance of both cost savings and being extremely remote. Our friends out in the Kern River Valley Hospital District, we looked at how to bring them more connectivity. They had all the copper loops in the facility. And when we looked at the fiber estimates, it was looking about $30 million to bring fiber out from the Bakersfield area back through there. A couple of fiber folks said probably wasn't going to happen because of the different lands that they had to cross, federal, state, BML lands, and it was just going to be too intensive to trench fiber that far. And so we created a solution where we took fiber where it was in Bakersfield and we're able to extend that out into the hospital and took them from a 12 meg connection to a gigabit connection, and was able to actually save them money without putting any upfront dollars. We sort of amortized the cost of construction into the monthly, and with the subsidies they were receiving, that actually was saving them money than what they were paying for 12 megs. With that, we were also able to convert their 170 POTS lines into hosted voice lines. And so the hospital has undergone a huge technological upgrade and has sort of brought them up to the levels and speeds that they feel that they need. Looking at another way that we can approach providing unique solutions and getting connectivity into neighborhoods and doing public-private partnerships is we are currently in discussions with the Val Verde Unified School District down in Riverside County. As you know, our school districts have just been hammered with COVID, with remote learning. People with inequality, can't afford internet, don't have access to internet, all these different things. Are trying to get by on hotspots, not all the hotspots work. So we've been working with them on creating a solution where GeoLinks would erect a network that would cover the entire district with gigabit level speeds for fixed installation, as well as a Wi-Fi based solution that will deliver 100 by 20. The district is going to subsidize that service for 5 years, 1,400 households. And then we will make available at low cost the connectivity either on a Wi-Fi basis for just $19 a month, or we will have a plan for a gigabit at $79, and then plan 2 will be at 200 by 200 meg symmetrical for $49 a month. And this pricing is prior to applying any sort of EBB ACP discount. So those families will be able to participate in those programs and see that price fully reduced. So this is a very unique approach. I think it's going to show a lot of success. The school is a trusted entity within that neighborhood, and we're not going to require a huge amount of data for these folks, and we're giving them the option to not have a physical installation because certain demographics are sensitive to that. So we really wanted to come up with a solution that said, we are building a network we know will work today, but is also scalable and takes into account how we can reach 100% of the district at a very low and affordable price point. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. Phil, you're right on time. Thank you.
Yes.
Great. Okay, we're going to move to Matt. Oh, wait, we're going to do a couple questions, Phil. So could you hang on, stay unmuted. So let's first do 2 quick ones. What is RDOF was a question. That is the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. It was a reverse auction where internet service providers were able to bid to serve unserved areas across the nation. What is ACP? That's the Affordable Connectivity Program of the FCC. It is essentially a $30 discount on a normal retail broadband plan for specifically eligible people who are low income or enrolled in certain programs.
$75 discount for tribes.
Oh yeah, $75 discount for tribes, which is big, and also some very remote areas, but you have to meet a certain qualification to get it. Thank you, Matt. Okay, so Phil, here's a quick one. Cost comparison, 30 miles of fiber versus 3 or 4 microwave hops. I don't know whether you can rough that out, but
yeah.
What's your experience?
So microwave is generally going to go as the crows flies. Fiber is generally going to go a route. So 30 route miles, depending on where you're going to go, can be a huge difference in sort of the locale. But if you take a rough, I'll just do some quick math on the fly here. Fiber can run you on the low side, a couple $100s a foot. You extrapolate that out. So we would probably be able to construct that for under $250,000 compared to probably a 7-figure build for a 30-mile fiber construction.
Wow. Okay. Is fixed wireless subject to climate events? So rain, fog?
So depending on how you construct the network and the frequencies that you use, you can't engineer through climate. You can engineer sort of around it, the fact that it's going to rain. So as long as you don't stretch those distances, we have rain calculations. We look at weather almanacs. We're doing using AI to help us predict climate change events and things of that nature. So the answer is, when constructed correctly and engineered correctly, the answer is no, but you can stretch it to where those things become an issue.
Okay, and then one last quick one. Phil Neufeld from Fresno says, Phil, are you deploying LTE, either CBRS or EBS?
We are currently not deploying CBRS or EBB with some of the constraints with sort of the sharing of that CBRS spectrum. We'll have to reduce the speed offering to a level that we're not comfortable with. And so that's why we made the purchase and are continuing to acquire more of that LMDS spectrum. While it still needs line of sight, we're able to deliver just much more speed and be in control, and there's no sharing of that spectrum or worry.
All right, great.
Can you
All right.
can you dispel the acronym there, LMDS?
Oh, I have to go back and look that one up. The licensed microwave spectrum.
Yeah, distribution system, I think.
Yeah, our distribution system. So yes, and that's in the 29 to 31 gigahertz range.
So pretty far up. Okay. Okay, that's an important acronym alert. We're getting a lot of acronym questions in the Q&A and
Yes.
the chat. So everybody try to take it easy on the acronyms. I'll be the acronym police. Okay, we're going to move to Matt.
Thank you. So, obviously Phil just laid down the groundwork for what everybody else is going to say, and that's probably why we had him go first. GeoLinks is out there doing amazing things with wireless that a lot of us aspire to do. Worked on the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association's Tribal Digital Village Network for I'm in the 21st year there. Built a microwave network that supports currently 17 of those communities that are member tribes, and their tribal municipalities and some of their tribal homes. And I think what needs to be understood here, and why we're focusing on wireless when we have billions of dollars and we're talking about middle mile opportunities in the state of California, and then end mile solutions, or to the home solutions, is the fact that some of the, and I'm going to do this mostly from a tribal perspective, but it really applies to extreme rural as well. Most of the solutions that are required to serve folks at the endpoints in the geography that is the tribal reservations don't really cater to fiber getting to every home. The cost is a problem. And so people might say, well, there's billions of dollars flowing through NTIA to serve tribes. Well, there was $980 million in the first round of the tribal broadband connectivity program, and only about half of the tribes applied for a total of $5.84 billion. So there's only $980 million to give out. So those are all fiber-based projects, and fiber, fiber thought process is about serving the endpoint with fiber and then maybe hybridized systems. There's not enough money. There's 2 billion more coming. You still haven't eliminated the deficit of the first half of the tribes that applied. So we're going to, unless we're going to throw another $7 billion at this, we're going to have to consider solutions that are cost effective, that still provide the speeds that we need to meet today, but also have some scalability built into them for a longer term, so that we're not wasting the dollar on something that is already going to be obsolete tomorrow. So the designs of these networks that make the most sense is bringing fiber as close to the endpoint as possible for these reservations. That would be to community anchor institutions, all the way down into areas where there's neighborhoods, and then hybridizing the system by putting wireless at the endpoints, where you have bigger backhaul really close to the end, and you can use a smaller wireless service to serve 10, 20 homes versus backing up and serving hundreds of homes with the same wireless effort. That makes wireless scalable in these situations. Bringing fiber and the backhaul as close to the endpoint as possible, and then doing a distribution network with wireless is the solution that allows you to meet the speeds of today, the 120 that Phil mentioned, but also the the speeds of tomorrow, the 200s, and and a little bit onward. The benefit of wireless gear is the cost is such dramatically different than deploying fiber, that you can replace the endpoints multiple times and still not have eclipsed the fiber cost in the beginning. Now, ultimately, we would all love fiber to the home. Don't get me wrong. But with 8,000 missing middle mile miles in the United States to connect the 574 tribes, and that's really just the 320 reservations in the lower 48. That's not including Alaska. So when you're looking at 8,000 missing miles in the lower 48 of fiber, just to get to the reservation in a meaningful location with a single connection, and then to build out all those networks on all of the reservations, the dollars aren't there. The tribes need more access to education on this technology. Some of their tribal leadership would like to get the training for their people to be able to manage these networks. Some of that training isn't existing in the scope that we need. And then, we've never had a bigger deficit of trustable partners to deploy these things in the United States, because there's so much money in the market. Everybody is busy, and there are now a bunch of bad actors, if you will, in the space. So it's hard to figure out who to trust to move on to these things. So I think what needs to happen, and there's a lot of folks on this call. I recognize many people on the list that are very trustable people that are working at state level, working at community level, that have relationships with their tribes. The time is now to reach out and to be able to support those relationships that you have. One such relationship, I see Frank Vernon on here, is the HP REN network that runs out of UCSD's Supercomputer Center. And we've been working with Hans Werner Braun and now Frank for 21 years, and doing Firewatch and things using our towers and our network to make the lives safer for Californians all around Southern California. So there are relationships like that. There are relationships, and this is all based on wireless. So these relationships and these IoT devices that track things like cameras and weather stations, wind meters, and things like that, those are all based in a lot of it in wireless technology. And all of this wireless technology is really valuable to the safe living in California in fire season and earthquakes and et cetera. So we have to remember to embrace the technologies that are actually delivering us some of the things that keep us alive and keep us safe. In the tribal communities, we found that deploying wireless is one of the faster ways to make a bigger difference. One, for cost; two, ease of deployment, and the fact that you don't have to trench. And trenching is an interesting scenario on tribal lands where the reservations were designed for the tribes to be put. And over the years, when artifacts and burials and things happened, some of those records were taken away or destroyed. And so accurate placement of grave sites and things like that are not necessarily common on reservations. So digging fiber, brings up some issues with, management of your sacred sites and things like that. So there are a little bit more complexities to actually deploying fiber. In California, if you're building fiber, you should be burying it. California's on fire all the time, and fiber burns when it's hanging in the air. So digging is the preferred method. So that does pose a complication on reservations, and wireless does allow us to move around those things. So I think I'll leave it at that, because I know we have a lot of questions. I see them streaming in, and I'll add into those later. Thank you.
That's great. Leanne, do you see any specific questions for Matt in the Q&A?
Matt, Something that keeps coming back up is, are the costs for fiber that are being used here for fiber on poles or trenched fiber?
Philip, you were guessing at buried?
Yeah,
or
I was
you-
looking, it varies. I was using a number in the middle when I was doing my calculation of what we've seen on both aerial and trenched, because you can't always do 100% aerial and you can't always do 100% trenched.
Right. So, a couple 100,000 per mile is sort of a middle ballpark or somewhere in there. So I think that's the varied number. It can get higher depending on if you're cutting through rock. It can get lower if you're, dragging something behind a plow or behind a caterpillar dragging a plow. But there's an average that's somewhere around.
Yeah, and there's a question that could be answered by either one of you, that is really about speeds being delivered rurally.
Oh, I think that one's
Valverde.
Phillips actually, because it talks about Valverde.
Yes.
What are the speeds for the $19 plan in Valverde, Philip?
Oh, that's a Wi-Fi based system for 100 over 20. So 100 down, 20 megs up.
Excellent.
All right. I think we are going to move to Professor Rao next. If both Matt and Philip could mute. Are you ready to go, Professor?
Yes, I am. Give me just a second so I get my display settings. All right, you're able to see my screen, I hope. So my name is Ramesh Rao. I'm a professor here at UC San Diego, where I direct a research institute named the Qualcomm Institute, where we apply technologies to society scale problems. And it's named the Qualcomm Institute because of their philanthropic support. It's a part of UC San Diego. What I wanted to do today is give you reasons to feel even more optimistic about the future than we are at the current point in time. And to do so, what I have here in front of you on the screen is a so-called spider diagram that comes from the 5G world. The specific details of where it comes from is less important than the various axes that you see represented. So for example, much of what we've been focusing on is the user data rate. And that's this axis here that goes up to 100 megabits per second. We also have other axes like the speed with which they might be moving around. So 500 kilometers per hour. Down here, we have latency goes down to 1 millisecond, right? So the idea behind these charts is to demonstrate how you can take wireless technologies and kind of squirt it in different ways to address different needs. So it's a system that doesn't have static sort of internal structure. You can apply it to meet different use cases. And there's a lot of interesting work that goes on both in hardware design as well as software that allows you to find yourself a location that you think will serve your needs. By the way, these are absolutely astonishing numbers. Even if you've been in the field for many, many years, peak data rates of 20 gigabits per second, I mean, unheard of. So where is this magic coming from? Why are these numbers not just a pie in the sky kind of projection, but grounded in some reality? One way to think about it is what's new that is being made available? Well, one of the things that's being made available is new spectrum. So in the license band with the commercial providers bid on, FCC has released almost 5 gigahertz of spectrum. And you see in blue the 4G bands, and then in red the 5G bands. You do notice that most of the new bands are in the mid band and the high band region, getting into millimeter waves. And surely all of us have been following the back and forth between the FAA and the FCC on this band here from 3.7 to 4.2. But part of the magic here is new frequency bands that are being made available, more than all other flexible use bands combined, right? So it's a historic kind of an opportunity to scale things. But licensed spectrum isn't everything. We also have unlicensed spectrum. And so this is what you build your Wi-Fi systems out of. And over here too, in the 6 gigahertz band, there is 1.2 gigahertz that is being made available. So there's a lot of new spectrum that has been released by the FCC, either through auctions or just through unlicensed bands, that makes it possible to be way more ambitious. Not to go into too many details here, but what you see stacked in these diagrams are these chunks of spectrum that you can use to run your system. So if you really want high data rate, you want to have a band which is not 20 megahertz. This one, is 160 megahertz. So you have bigger chunks that are available, so you can develop and deploy systems that might meet the particular needs that you might have that rely on that. Moving to yet another aspect of the magic behind these extraordinary performance figures we are seeing is, you probably hear this all over the place, massive Mimo. So what is Mimo? Multiple input, multiple output, kind of a techie term. But I like to use an analogy. This is sort of what is how things are currently done. You have a base station. Let's pretend it is a sprinkler that you set up, and you're squirting water all over your lawn and hoping that you'll water all the plants there, right? Even though you might have plants in a few locations, radiate power all over. With massive Mimo, what you end up doing is sending out what looks like pencil beams to where the users are, right? So you're using your power much more intelligently. You can track the location where these units are and avoid radiating in directions that you don't need to. These systems are more complex. These antennas have an array, not just a few, lots and lots. And you're doing very clever processing in there so that you can point these beams in the directions in which you're likely to find a user. There's a lot of room for advanced algorithms, machine learning techniques, understanding mobility, understanding the actual terrain, and knowing that cars will move only along streets whose geometries by now you know. So this is partly how you squeeze out a lot more capacity from these systems. So we heard from Philip and GeoLinks about their ground level experience, but I just grabbed a few headlines, relatively recent ones, October, November, December of 2021. And, gigabit fixed wireless, 2.7 gigabits per second. This demonstration that Mawande did was actually in moving vehicles. So it's quite extraordinary to see that you can hit rates like this. I know we are concerned about uplink and downlink. So here's another demonstration that was done showing uplink speeds of 986 megabits per second. So these are not imaginary figures. They are here and now. And as we try to figure out how to plan for the future for the next 5 to 10 years, you clearly have wireless has a lot to offer. So what does all this new capability and the ability to take advantage of it in different ways allow you to do? Well, it basically allows you to chase after new use cases. The top three may not be that pertinent: smart homes, large capacity stadiums and wearables and so on. But the bottom three, I think, are very important from a point of view of inclusiveness. Reaching small rural medical clinics, remote sensing of the environment, and protecting critical infrastructure. All of these do require these systems to be deployed in less populated, much more sparse environments. I'm delighted that Philip and Matt connect with HP REN, Alert Wildfire. This is a more than 20-year-old story. Hans Werner Braun started it off with an award from NSF. Frank Wernen has been a critical part of it. It in the early days was helping monitor the seismic activity that we have in the state, and then Alert Wildfire turned out to be a perfect overlay on top of that. So here it is. We have wireless internet connectivity that goes into some of the most remote parts. You do want to be on every mountaintop if you're wanting to monitor wildfires. And it's not going to be easy to pull fiber to every mountaintop. These links run between 100, 500 megabits per second. And it has enabled the state to have affordable, persistent monitoring of the environment in ways that has a huge impact on livelihoods and our economy. So once again, echoing the themes previous presenters were also reinforcing, wireless has a role to play. It's not an either or discussion. We can hybridize fiber with wireless in ways that allows us to produce the biggest bang for the buck.
Excellent. Leanne, do we have any questions for Professor Rao?
We do. The first is, what is APAA? Ramesh?
APAA. Where did that come in?
Are you talking about aggressive packet? What's the term? Aggressive packet adaptive assembly? Did that come? Were you talking about that?
Yes. This massive Mimo. Yes. So you want to very dynamically steer as a function of the traffic as well as the function of the location of where the receiver is.
Okay, and John Graham is asking, when will we have 100 gigabit wireless links for backhaul to 100 gigabit fiber?
It depends on so many things, not the least of which is how much you're willing to pay for it, what distances you want to run it, and what are the environmental conditions. You can engineer these systems. We don't use those kinds of numbers right now over long distances. We use it over relatively short distances, but that time will come.
And then Doug Toomey asks, can you comment on a range of 5G in particular? If you want to monitor the environment with IoT, how close must the base station be?
So IoT is a good example of a low data rate application. And so you can engineer the system to go over longer distances. So you can collect IoT data from much longer distances, fewer base stations. So there are applications like electricity meter, kinds of systems, right? So those can be done with relatively modest investments in the actual infrastructure.
And then there's two anonymous questions. One is really about spectrum. Is there specific industry terminology that differentiates between 4G LTE, 5G, and hybrid fiber fixed wireless systems?
In terms of spectrum, FCC is quite clear, and these standards making processes make it abundantly clear. So those frequency charts that I was showing, like the 4G and the 5G, you can tell the difference. So at a high level, there is this difference between licensed band and unlicensed band. The licensed bands go up for auction, and these providers bid on, and the unlicensed bands are unlicensed. Anybody can use them.
Okay, I think we're going to go to our final panelist, if that's okay, Leanne.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, you are up, Nishal.
Thank you. Let me just get my slides. Can you guys see this? We're good? All right. I'm pretty excited to be on this panel with some of my colleagues and collaborators, and a lot of you who are listening, we also know. So I'm the founder of technology-driven nonprofit, MoHuman, and our vision is of driving the transfer of power and resources to digitally underserved people and communities through access to the internet and digital services for things like school, work, health, government engagement, these types of things that are everyday life now and they're digital. More importantly, though, I'm coming to you from the perspective of MoHuman as a movement of national partners, local partners, and champions, and those who are left out of the technology decisions that are made that affect their economic, social, health, and education equity. So we work with the people, with communities. We spend a lot of time on the ground, building relationships to co-develop the strategies and the technologies that work for the people in the communities they're in. Everything we do is driven by data and with the people and with partners like those on the call and on the panel today. So I'm going to try to drop some knowledge around broadband from the bottom up today. And hopefully after this, if you didn't know some of it, you're going to know more, pun intended. Contact information is here as well. So we work in low-income communities across the United States. We actually work in promise zones, which are 22 across the US federally defined areas that are economically depressed a mix of urban, rural, and tribal areas. I'm going to talk about San Diego Promise Zone, which is an urban area, and we also work with Sacramento. The thing about the San Diego Promise Zone and other areas like this is that there are huge digital inequities right there in the middle of these cities, right? It's not just in rural and tribal areas. So the San Diego Promise Zone, for example, is digitally redlined. So there's a red line drawn around these communities where there's no infrastructure investment, broadband infrastructure investment, or anything like that. And access, this word is a strange word used in broadband because access can mean terrible access or great access, right? And access for these communities that we work with means poor technology for poor people. So just be aware of that word. So quickly, the San Diego Promise Zone, you know, one thing is not everyone has high-speed at-home internet or phones with unlimited data plans, right? This is American Census data. Just so you know, when they do the measurements for broadband, if one house on a block has internet, then they assume that everybody on the block has it. So these data are not the best. So the population of the 6.4 square mile area is about 73,000 people. About a third are living below the poverty level. And look at this, about 45,000 people don't have at-home internet, which is a terrible thing to happen. So what does service look like? What does internet service look like in the San Diego Promise Zone? Well, it's expensive. You have things like DSL and even satellite connectivity, expensive, slow, and where there is high-speed internet through cables, it's actually very unreliable. In fact, I have colleagues from academia who live in these communities and had to cancel their high-speed service because it was so unreliable. And it never met the speeds either. 1 gig, it never did it. Maybe at 4:45 a.m. in the morning for like a nanosecond, you might get it. And small businesses suffer quite a bit in these areas, especially micro enterprises. The city's digital inclusion efforts are focused on providing outdoor Wi-Fi for people, but people need high-speed internet in their homes and businesses, right? Government subsidies like the EBB program and ACP that you heard of before on this from other panelists don't reach the digitally unconnected and underconnected. People who signed up for these programs were existing customers. Local and national data show this from internet service providers. 98, 99% were existing customers, so we're not reaching the unconnected. You know, the people that we work with, a quick story, and it's just, you've probably seen pictures of kids working in, you know, donut shop parking lots and so on to get Wi-Fi. Well, we see this all the time. I mean, there's this, for example, there's a lady with 3 daughters, right, in elementary school. She has a couple jobs. When she gets home, they eat dinner in her car in the school's parking lot because they don't have home internet and not unlimited data on the phone, and they do their homework that way. That's just not good. I mean, outdoor Wi-Fi and parking lot Wi-Fi are okay, but you know, they're crappy solutions that maintain the digital divide. So let's talk about what else comes to bring digital equity and digital inclusion for communities and for people. Broadband is essential, right? High-speed internet is essential as the bridge between people in these communities to the other things that we need to do to get everybody up to speed of you and I. So people don't really care about speed numbers or latency numbers or anything. What they care about is getting fast, reliable, and affordable connectivity for school and work and so on. And, you know, this has just been, you know, the SARS-2 pandemic just made this essential, right? We all know that. But people they just need things to work for them. The internet needs to be fast for people, of course, and not just because we can make it fast or for policy or bureaucratic strategies and negotiations. But not everyone has modern devices, right? The devices that we have, we're talking about 5-year-old devices. We're talking about refurbished devices in these communities. Chromebooks that are dependent on connectivity to work and bloatware on the computers that reduce the speed of the internet. So communities with older technologies are helped immensely by higher speed internet to get people what they need and where they need it. So we need that internet part so that we can deliver the digital services and all the digital inclusion services for small businesses, digital health, and so on, to build that digital resilience. It takes trust, okay? These communities have been screwed over by corporations, by governments, by researchers. They take and take, and they're always on the wrong side of this. So we have worked with national partners, including CNIC, Qualcomm Institute, and others, and local partners that work with students, community centers, community development corporations. It's just a small sample of our partners, to figure out how do we bring internet so that we can do the digital inclusion work that we need. So, you know, one thing that we worked out is, like CNIC is a National Research and Education Network, an NREN, right? It's present in California. We've partnered with them. We've partnered with Qualcomm Institute and universities, our Digital Resilience Collaborative, some technology companies that build social good networks in rural areas, and other coalitions here in San Diego, to work with these NRENs to build community internet. The interesting thing about this is that CNIC is in California, but there are NRENs across the United States and across the world. And we think that this is a great way of nucleating community-run networks. Just a quick overview on what we've developed with the community. Again, this is not us coming in and saying, this is what you should do. This is what we've developed with the community for their needs. It's called, we call it MoNet, for you fancy people, Monet. It includes, it's cutting edge, right? It's dynamic, so it's Wi-Fi, high-speed Wi-Fi. We include CBRS in there as well for places that's hard to penetrate. And remember, we're working in areas where there's not much infrastructure, right? We can get 100 by 20 megabits per second. We can get higher than this as well. And the thing is, this is for people who don't have internet, who can't afford it. But if you can pay, you can pay for internet as well. What people don't realize is that many people in these communities have broadband debt, $500 or more, that prevent them from qualifying for internet service from providers. What we've developed, it's always free. It'll always default to 25 by 5, which is higher than the FCC definition of broadband. For people to go to school, to work, software defined, which means it's easy to manage and manipulate. It's sustainable. We spent a year with economists, technologists, everybody, to develop a sustainability model from the economic side. It's community supported, because if we think of infrastructure, we're not going to build towers in the middle of a crowded city. But what we can do is work with community-based organizations and small businesses and community centers and churches to put up small pieces of equipment that creates this wireless last mile network that brings high-speed internet to the people. And it's easily upgraded as well. And that is to say that it enables the rest of the work that us as digital inclusion organizations need to do. It can bring the digital service that we need. Actually, with the communities, again, we created a platform called MoDAT, for Mo Digital Advocate, that provides localized digital inclusion services for finding devices, getting digital literacy, all the digital services for health, finance, workforce development, and so on, locally, online, and partners where there are gaps in local services. So this last mile really enables us to bring digital inclusion to our communities. Now, we're leaving, I'm almost done with these slides here. So we are living in an age where I have never seen inclusion driving innovation at this level, right? There are organizations like us and the rest of the organizations across the country that now have the ability and the resources to implement these programs and these off-the-shelf technologies. We have helped to push the Digital Equity Act, the $65 billion everybody's talking about in the infrastructure bill, EBB program, banning redlining. This is all stuff that we've been working with our communities to push, and other partners like, ACLU, Reddit, EFF, and so on, at the federal, state, and at the local level as well. We really have an opportunity right now to make a difference for everyone. And here's how it makes a big difference, okay? The last mile empowers all of the things that we need to do. We have shown with our data, with partners and everybody else, that we can provide high bandwidth, low latency, good penetration in the communities, and dynamic network that can work. For the people, it's affordable, safe, reliable, and sustainable. And it's easily deployable and community owned and operated. And it's easily upgradable, okay? I'm gonna stop sharing. And so I'm gonna stop sharing this and show you something. Because look at these Lego bricks. It's not an umbrella like my son told me, but we're capable of taking Lego bricks and building amazing things together. And I feel like we're at the age right now with wireless technology where we can get all the things on the left and we can mix and match and make the type of networks that we need for our community. So I'm showing you something just for a couple of seconds. This is my head. It's kind of big, brown and round, but this is an antenna next to my head, about the same size. This right here is a receiver that's the size of my cell phone, just thicker, okay? This goes on one of those buildings. Let's say a nonprofit's building or a small business or someone's home, or you know, a parking lot or something, right? Like a parking structure. This is a receiver that goes on someone's house. Direct line of sight, less than a quarter mile. We've got wireless to your home, in your home, okay? That's it. That's it. It's nothing fancy. It's not rocket science. I'm a scientist. So that's how it works. And we can get high speed. In fact, the equipment I'm showing you right here, it's off the shelf. It's affordable. And it can get a gigabit. In the right conditions, it can get a gigabit symmetric bandwidth up and down. So there we go. I think we need to just make sure that we get the middle mile in the right places so it can benefit all communities. So it can enable last mile wireless that works. And you can see everybody talking today have said it. So that we can get to the work that really matters to bring these communities up, digitally rise them up so they can become more digital resilient, I guess.
Thank you. Oh, I love the visual at the end. Someone just asked who made that device? Who's the maker?
We work with a bunch of it, but I think this is Siklu.
Say again?
Siklu.
Okay. And
SIKLU.
Francis asked, can you put that equipment on a street light?
Yes.
Yes. And Olivier asked,
Smart street.
people without internet, don't they usually have smartphones? What's your response to that?
Yes, they do. Not everyone. Sorry, Matt?
No, I'm going to jump in afterwards.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the assumption is that everyone has a smartphone. Not everyone has a smartphone. And even if you do, the data plans are very limited. So you have to worry about a gigabit of data or something like that. It runs out very quickly.
Yeah, and in Indian country, it's a little bit different. You have lack of internet service to the home, broadband to the home. And some of these folks will have a smartphone, but you have to remember that cell coverage on reservation is very, very low. Most reservations don't have full cell coverage covering their land. So you have a smartphone, you still got to drive somewhere to use it. It's still not the fiber to the home solution or wireless to the home solution that you need to perform work or school from home.
Great. We just got a question to the panelists. Are you willing to make your decks available to the participants? We can add it somewhere on the scenic link probably, right, Leanne? Okay, so make sure you get it to us so that we could share. Okay, thank you. That was terrific. And now we're going to do a little Q&A run by moi. And the first thing I wanted to do is we're going to do some myth busting about wireless. And I'm going to give you some myths and you tell me whether they're true or not true and why. Try to be really pithy, you guys. So here's one. Cell providers like AT&T Wireless, T-Mobile, Verizon Wireless, fixed wireless broadband, in-home Wi-Fi, and satellite broadband are all the same. Make sure you unmute, guys. Jump in. Let's do it fast.
Yeah, all using wireless technology, yes, but as far as the end user experience, the underlying actual technology, no, they're all different. They have different characteristics about them that both and specific applications that will either benefit or not from this. So
okay, anyone else? Professor, it seems like you should jump in here.
Yeah, they have been engineered to support different end use cases. So they scale in different ways. They are designed for different purposes. Yes, they're all wireless, but I think in terms of how far you can push them does vary a great deal. So limitations you might encounter, bad experiences you might have with one doesn't necessarily apply to the other.
Yep. And I would answer that, the FCC has some of them licensed exclusively, for example, the cellular providers. Wi-Fi is traditionally unlicensed, and satellite is definitely licensed because there's only so many satellites up in the sky. Okay, myth. Wireless is less cyber secure than fiber networks. Who wants to go?
Should we start with the professor?
I think we should. I'm looking at him.
So, security, you really should be thinking about it as an end-to-end thing. And if you look at any example where security was compromised, there's almost always a social engineering element to it. So yes, wireless is a piece of it. It's not the entire thing. And depending on what your assumptions are about what the adversary is doing, it may or may not be relevant to whether it's wireless or not. All that said, you can also do end-to-end encryption. So you can protect transmissions. It depends on what the attack model is. There are plenty of attack models that will penetrate just about everything. So here is the most far out one that I track. I couldn't believe it when I first heard about it, but it's true. There are devices that can sniff the RF waves that your graphics card produces as it renders text on your screen. And if you sit there and watch it, collect this RF data, you can read the screen. Right? Like, let that sink in, right? You're not tapping into any wires or wireless where the communication is taking place, but there are these wireless RF signatures that are coming off of your display, which can be broken into. So, I think it's simplistic to try to reduce it. I think we should be concerned about cybersecurity. There's a whole bunch of measures we have to take to ensure that we can be secure, but it would be premature to try to reduce it to whether it's wireless or wired.
Is it fair to say when the standards group are working on wireless technologies that they try to build in the cybersecurity from ground up these days?
Yeah, and think about all the examples you've heard about breaches. How much of it was done because of compromising anything on the wireless side?
Anybody else want to go on that one?
Yeah, I just want to add and echo what Ramesh said about the user side of it. Especially with new users of the internet and aging users as well who are new to the internet, that digital literacy around cybersecurity and keeping yourself safe and your privacy secure is really important because people can get around those, right?
That's right.
It's a cost problem too for networks that are, that don't have a lot of money to spend. They tend to slack on the security pieces that are in the pathway to the rest of the world. And, that should be considered when money is being distributed from federal government and state government for some of these endpoint solutions, to include those pieces of the network that are so essential to make sure that that is a safe scenario, rather than, oh yeah, you have a connection now, you're all good to go. Well, there are firewalls and different devices that can sit in between you and the public that could make this a very valuable network to you, or it can make it a trap for you to be caught in ransomware or some other, nefarious plan. So I think we need to make sure that our money solutions are addressing the entire network, not just the connectivity.
Absolutely. Hey, Jack. Jack asks the professor, screen sniffing at what distance from the screen?
Yeah, fairly close. I think you put
Okay.
it right next to it. But again, if depending on what you're trying to do, you can engineer it. If you have the ability to build an antenna that sits outside and picks the signal up, there is no absolute answer to this, but I think in the experiment that was reported, it was right next to it.
Right. Okay, here's our next myth. Bad weather like rain and fog impact all wireless services, rain fade. I think Phil kind of did this, but any other comments on the weather issue?
I think Phil said this, you engineer your way around it, depending on the environment, depending on the size of your mesh network, you can route traffic around disruptions. But let me also be direct. At some point, something will get you. It may well be that during a super heavy hailstorm for some time, you don't have connectivity. But there are so many things that fail us when you have catastrophic events like that. So
Yeah, and
Matt?
another thing to address is the fact that a lot of these wireless networks live off the grid of power, so they're running on solar. So you're more likely to lose your solar power in a long, cloudy period, storm, whatever the case, on a mountaintop than you are losing the wireless signal. The Tribal Digital Village networks problems mostly lie with the upkeep of 23 sites on solar that are off grid and maintaining that power solution. The one place where we get in trouble is when we have a super high elevation shooting down to a super low elevation and you have a layer of clouds in the middle. It acts like a mirror, depending on how wet the cloud is. That's really our only situation that we see on a regular basis. And most of the solutions we have work around it. So it's not really a huge issue if you design it right, like Philip said.
All right, that was great answers, guys. Okay, myth. Wireless has latency problems, making things like video conferencing difficult. What about that, guys?
Well, I'm on a wireless link right now, and so my video conferencing seems to be working. No. Side. So when you look at your backhaul, and whether that's fiber, fixed wireless, whatever, it starts with a certain number of latency getting you from your content provider to where that wireless is being distributed from, and it's not even a full millisecond that you're going to add for each device that you're going to add on there. So if the fiber is already at seconds, you have to add 2 or 3 different wireless devices, you're still going to be well within the range. So the technology has just made such a jumps and evolutions over the past couple of years, but also the backhaul. When a lot of people are comparing their fixed wireless experience, that backhaul is being run on a DSL or a copper line that already had high latency, jitter, and packet loss, and then you were adding wireless gear on top of it. When we're meshing wireless and fiber together, we can generally keep the latency extremely low.
So if I might jump in, and if you remember from the spider diagram, the most aggressive low latency target is 1 millisecond. And they say that that's really what you can sense more than you can hear or see. So there are applications that rely on such low latency. Autonomous driving, for example, you want to be able to react very rapidly and take precautionary measures if you think there is a crash coming your way. So the way I would like to say it is you want a well-engineered system. Not everybody is going to need low latency. If you're watching Netflix, it's okay to have 5-second latency. Who cares? You want a smooth video. That's all you care for. So you should not be paying for the heavily engineered system that is designed to give you 1 millisecond latency when you don't need it. So the best use of the limited resources when you have a backend that can adapt to the application. And I think you could carry this idea both the wireless and wired space, but the folks that run wireless systems tend to do this because often spectrum is at a premium. So you're incentivized to make the most aggressive use to keep the most number of customers happy given the limited spectrum that you have.
Good answer. Okay, fixed wireless technologies cannot achieve required speeds for the federal subsidies. For example, 100 megabits per second down, 20 megabits per second up, or 100 symmetrical. So what's the answer there, guys?
Well, from an operator standpoint, we were awarded in CAF and at 100 by 20 and in RDOF at the gigabit speed. And we've got thousands of customers across doing megs and multiple gigabit and multi-gigabit customers. So it all comes down to the engineering that we keep going back to that. I think wireless gets a bad rap because you've had a bad experience with terrestrial providers, and I don't write off the entire technology. Just that one provider could not provide me a great experience. The same goes for wireless. So you just have to sort of look at each provider and what they're engineering and look at multiple factors of it instead of just writing off the entire tech. The stuff that Mohuman's using, Siklu's got radios that do 10 gigabits in point-to-point scenarios. So it's definitely capable.
Others? Speeds, any problems getting to speeds, Matt?
I think the design is the key. Early on, the Tribal Digital Village network was using wireless to do everything and not a lot of money. So we were broadcasting or shooting wireless into communities that had 400 homes, and we were trying to use the unlicensed spectrum from one distribution point to serve those 400 homes, and you run out of frequency and spectrum because there's not enough available for public use like that. So the design of bringing the backhaul closer to the endpoint so that your distributions can be smaller and more focused can allow you to increase the amount of throughput per home because you have less homes connected per access point. There's some design things like that that are going to make a huge difference. The technology's flipped like, I don't know, 7 times since I started in 2001. So data compression has increased dramatically. The Mimo stuff that the Ramesh was talking about, the multiple in, multiple out technologies, and then the GPS synchronizations that are on some of the things that are out there today have really increased the effectiveness of wireless talking to multiple customers at the same time and managing those customers so that they're not talking over each other or interrupting each other. So with the new tech and design, you can solve a lot of these problems. It does not scale to what fiber can do. We all know this, but the standards that we were shooting for now can easily be obtained, and hopefully some beyond that for the near future.
All right, here's your next myth. Only fiber to the home or fiber to the premise is future-proof.
Which future? Blade Runner? What are you talking about?
I kind of think in this, say, a couple decades. Who wants to go?
Fiber is a 30 to 40 year asset, so there's a benefit. Wireless is cheap enough to swap it out 4 or 5 times in that timeline for the same cost, and who knows what compression software and things are going to happen over time, but they're not going to scale equally, but they're going to scale. And I'll give it to the professor after that.
Yeah, interesting. I want to pull this discussion in a slightly different direction. I'm sure the fiber guys will make their case too, but let me make the case for wireless. As we move to higher and higher frequencies, in effect, your communication signal is also like a radar. You can use the same signal to locate objects. These radios are aggressively trying to adapt themselves as a function of the number of obstacles, the number of people moving in and out, and so on and so forth. There's already research that demonstrates that you can measure your breathing rate, your heart rate, by watching, using the same millimeter wave signals that you're using for communications and watching how the channel fluctuates, doing enough machine learning on it, they can figure out your heart rate. Right. So as we go to higher and higher frequencies, wireless gives you some other sensing capabilities without having to deploy a whole lot of new infrastructure. Okay. And that's all about position. So, and there is a whole bunch of things that you can activate if you have positioning information. So I think, how does fiber do that? It's tethered to a location. How does fiber provide support for mobility? I think increasingly we all want to be moving around while we are communicating. So, it has its place, don't get me wrong, but I think there are some things that wireless can do that makes it future-proof, in particular, sensing and mobility.
It's a very, very interesting point. Phil, you got any thoughts on this? I figured you might.
Oh, yeah, sort of going on the, yeah, going on the,
wireless.
we use both. Going on off of what the professor was talking about, you've got some sort of tower structure in which you're putting your wireless distribution gear. That same vertical asset can be leveraged for the alert wildfire cameras, can be leveraged for a LoRaWAN gateway to do IoT sensing. There's just so many different things when we talk about future proofing that I think it can't be one or the other. We live in a hybrid network. We don't walk around with a corded telephone anymore. No one's plugging their laptop into Ethernet. Like, wireless has a place in the ecosystem, and I think the future is just meshing both of those technologies when it makes the most sense.
All right. I think, Leanne, we are now going to go to Q&A. We've done really well on time, so thank you, panelists. I threatened them early on that they couldn't go on and on, so thank you for being good.
Let me go back here and find some open questions.
Well, one of them I know had to do with, somebody asked about the new Starlink satellite broadband system.
A lot of those have been answered online, but
Well, I'm
think
not
I-
sure everybody saw it.
yeah, I
so-
think a few people have different opinions on this, but the tribal perspective is low Earth orbit satellite. So let's just generic instead of just Starlink. Is a very valuable tool to solve problems where we can't build or can't afford to build more network to get out to the last two houses. It is going to fill in those potholes that fiber didn't run past, that wireless can't reach because we don't have another tower to see around that ridge line, because we don't have access to the spectrum that shoots over that ridge line. We need some way to be line of sight or somewhat line of sight. These are really good, what I call pothole solutions, where they fill in gaps in networking that don't cater to traditional terrestrial support from existing networks that are already in the space. Is it a ubiquitous countrywide or worldwide solution? I don't think the bandwidth's there, but it is a wonderful solution for really rural communities that don't have, ubiquitous coverage based in terrestrial systems.
I think there's a fairly high dish cost too, like $400 or $500. It was something like that.
Yeah, and then it's $100 a month. So that's unaffordable to most reservation homes.
Right. Okay. Anyone else want to talk about that before we move on to the next question? Okay.
If I remember correctly, it was about capacity. And so my response is just they're both going to grow in capacity. Like, how does fixed wireless going to pace? I think the spectrum that's allocated, the gear that's allocated, both from the access point that's serving the customer premise equipment, all of that stuff's going to continue to pace, I think, at around the same. So the capacity of low Earth orbiting satellites will increase, but fixed wireless will.
Good point. Leanne, what you got next?
There's a question about community health concerns around 5G wireless, and are there any resources available to dispel that?
Well, the first thing I'd say is the FCC does have a page about RF and health issues, so I would refer people there first. Others? Professor, you might say something.
Yes, so one does have to be careful about these things, and given that the deployment may be very ubiquitous, we may not have information, we may not have measurements and data that would actually allow us. But to be at the risk of being more provocative than I intended to be, there is a whole line of work coming from the medical field that has to do. You probably heard about transcranial magnetic stimulation. There are people who come out of lifelong depression because you stimulated parts of their brains using signals of a certain frequency. So the brain structures do respond to electromagnetic signals, and people are actively exploiting that, trying to figure out how to harness that, how to understand how it affects the brain. And you're not going to believe me, but I'll tell you nonetheless, and you can look it up. There's a study that was done in Denmark where they looked at everybody in the nation that suffered from neuroblastoma, cancer, everybody, and they tracked their cell phone usage. And they found that people that used cell phones that were radiating in a certain band actually had lower incidence, not higher, glioblastoma, okay? So the effect of electromagnetic transmissions on the human brain, I think, is an important field to study. It isn't always a negative thing. It might even be positive in some cases. We need to better understand this. And it's not just a matter of doing large-scale clinical tests, but it's also a matter of understanding the underlying mechanisms. So you need to involve other individuals in this study who understand how the brain reacts to electromagnetic signals.
Okay, with that story, it was not the ending I expected, I've got to tell you. Okay, there's a great question in the Q&A that I do want to ask. They're asking about the role of libraries and broadband. And so they're asking, have you done some work with libraries? What are the libraries' role going forward on broadband? Anyone want to grab that one?
I'll start it. Yeah, so tribal libraries are really important in tribal communities. It's for the longest time, it's been the only place that had internet connectivity, especially in the Southern California tribes, where that was one of the first things that we connected was tribal municipalities and then the library itself. After school programs are held there, a lot of tutorials and online classes and things like that were held in the libraries, and they've been a crucial part of the community. We've created Wi-Fi drive-ins, if you will, or Wi-Fi parking lots off of the libraries to be able to support the community during COVID. It's always been a central hub for this kind of stuff, checking out devices and different things, and we've supported all of our libraries. We were the first consortium of tribes to get E-rate back in 2002. They gave it to us with 24 hours to spend it, so we had to deny it, and took it again in 2003, and then kind of figured out the workaround for the rest of the tribes and have been promoting that. Now what they're proposing to do in E-rate is some of the things that we asked them to do in 2003 to fix it. So it's been a long haul on that, but I think it's a very valuable space to be connecting people. And it's a great starting point for communities to be able to grow broadband.
Others?
Yeah, so libraries are places where people from the community can rent, can borrow hotspots. There's also free Wi-Fi there. More importantly, all of the libraries that we work with, they're also the go-to digital navigator people where people go for help. So that's a really important function for bridging the digital divide for people. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, except if we start to defund the libraries, which seem to be happening.
So I wanted to chime in very quickly, very similar to what Nishal said, that libraries actually are in the business of connecting with the community that they lend things to and get it back, right? That's who is in that business. So to the extent that what we are talking about isn't just about connectivity, but also devices, if you want to address educational disparities and so on, you got to be able to loan other kinds of things. So I think they have a role, and I'm in particular really focused on the trust relationship they have. Everybody understands what a library is. So I think they're a very important part of what we'll be doing. And they are on Scenic, thanks to the way Scenic is set up. They're already networked. So.
Yep, Scenic does a fantastic job connecting our schools and libraries here in California, in addition to our universities. And we want to thank them for their leadership in getting those schools and libraries hooked up. I know there's been some amazing projects that have been in partnership with Scenic and E-rate and GeoLinks, for example, to get a bunch of schools that had never been connected, which changed them. Go ahead, Matt.
I just wanted to showcase too that Scenic is the first research and education network that I know of that has connected tribes. Scenic is the head-end connection for the Tribal Digital Village Network, sort of breaking the ground for the rest of folks to understand what that means. And I do see a few folks from Oregon and some other states on this call that will be, looking at this. Research and education networks are very close to tribes in their pathways, and sometimes maybe the only access. So it's great that we've learned how to navigate that and connect the two, and we need to replicate that more often.
Okay, I'm going to give each panelist a minute to give us one last thought to leave us with. And your theme is the future of wireless for broadband. Who wants to go first? I just surprised him with this question, which I usually don't do that, but this is a good panel. Who wants to go first?
So let me jump in here and mention something that did not come up in our discussions, but which I think is a huge driver for a lot of licensed and unlicensed band use of wireless, and that is extended reality systems, head-mounted displays, and living in this metaverse, not only to rediscover and reconnect our creative side, but also increasingly, I think, healthcare, education. And I think this is going to be an important part of what wireless will activate. It pushes, if you go back to the spider diagram, many of these things, you need really high data rate, you need really low latency. So I think just like the smartphone opened our minds to what wireless could enable and created a whole new ecosystem, I think this coming world, or maybe it's already here, of the extended reality systems is going to be the next big thing for wireless to activate.
Wow, that's a good one. All right, who wants to go next?
So I think when we look at where we are right now in this, I believe, once in a generational time period that we have this funding available to make change, we have to reach everyone. I feel like we're obligated to leverage these dollars in the best way possible, and that is to reach everyone and use the best tool in our tool belt to get there. So that's going to be some LEO, some wireless, some fiber. At the end of the day, what matters is that we get to these communities, we get to these people, and everyone has to the internet, because it can change their life, change the trajectory of my life, change the trajectory of a bunch of people that I knew that came up in the inner city, single parent homes below the poverty line. And having access to internet gave us information to expand our horizons on what was going to be available to us. To kind of steal a cheesy line, talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not currently. And this is our chance as people in the industry, as legislators, to make sure that we take the best possible approach to extend that opportunity to everyone.
That was awesome. Okay, who's next?
I'll go. And with a name like Mo Human, I have to talk from the people in the community's perspective, like Philip was saying. We can't forget these communities. They're described as laggards if you look at the adoption curve for technology. But the power of the internet is a gateway to digital equity, to health equity, to all of the services that's needed in these communities. We need to make sure that the middle mile and the last mile wireless networks have the opportunity to build for these communities with them, because it represents really great economic opportunity for households, but also the whole community itself, small businesses, and everything else.
And to dovetail into all of those comments, the future of the internet is the option to actually be on the internet. You have to have access. We want to make sure that everyone has the choice for affordable, fast, low latency solutions where they live, so that they can perform the functions they need to be part of this century, honestly. Reservations are remote and cut off from a lot of services, even if they're adjacent to a town. As soon as you cross the line, the services drop. So we want to make sure that the native communities, the tribal communities, have access to the standards of today, so that they may be able to participate and function as if they were not on a reservation. So, these are the solutions that we need, and affordability is one of the bigger ones, but actually having access for everyone to make that choice and something they could actually afford is going to be primary.
Fantastic. We have 1 minute left, so I wanted to thank our panelists who did an amazing job. I learned so much, and I want to make sure that you know how much I'm sure everybody gained from this. I wanted to let you know that this was recorded, and so if you have colleagues that you wished had heard this, it's not too late for them. You can go to the Scenic site, and there will be a recording available soon in order for them to also hear this panel. I also want to mention that in early February, Scenic will be doing the next one of these roundtable presentations, and the topic the next time will be on advanced technologies from cable broadband systems. And the one after that, again, will be on advances in fiber networks. So this is a learning experience, and I think what I learned is you do whatever it takes to get to the goal, and our goal is to get everybody connected to broadband. Thank you all for being with us, and we are signing off. Thank you. Bye-bye. Great job, everyone.